Hello, I'm Damon DeMolder, and this is the Sirui 24mm f2.8 1.33 times anamorphic lens. It's the third in the range. It joins the 35 and the 50 that already exist for mirrorless cameras. I've got mine in the Micro Four Thirds mount because that's what I like to use for shooting video. Primarily because that gives me the most options about the way the image is going to turn out, and also because this is the best mirrorless format for shooting with anamorphic lenses. Obviously, because it's a Micro Four Thirds lens, it's going to fit a whole bunch of different cameras. For movie making, the Lumix GH5, GH5S are the standard options, while Blackmagic folk will favour the 4K or 6K pocket cinema cameras. I've never used the Z-Cam, but that also offers a Micro Four Thirds mount option as well. I've also got the new Lumix GH1 box camera that works very nicely with this lens as well, and it even offers a choice of de-squeeze factors in the preview, including a 1.33 times mode to match this lens and the other Sirui anamorphic. I've singled out the GH5, GH5S, the Z-Cam, the GH1 and the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras because they've all got a dedicated anamorphic mode, which makes life much easier when you're actually shooting. They all offer a de-squeeze preview in the viewfinder and on the back screen, so you can actually see what you're going to get, and it makes composition so much easier. And also they can make the most of the resolution of the sensor. Crucially too, they give us the option of deciding what aspect ratio we're going to end up with in our final movie. Olympus OMD and all the other Lumix G cameras also allow you to shoot very good anamorphic video in 4K or Full HD with this lens. You will need an external monitor though if you want to be able to preview the de-squeezed effect of the anamorphic lens while you're shooting. Otherwise you can just guess and use a bit of experience. When working with the Lumix and Blackmagic systems, we have a choice of producing a finished movie in 2.35 to 1, 2.5 to 1 or 16:9 aspect ratios. Of course, most people go looking for that long letterbox format for their anamorphic pictures, but there's a lot to be said for making the most of the 1.33 times anamorphic effect of this lens to create high resolution 16:9 video with the same anamorphic characteristics as we get in the letterbox format. What makes this interesting is the slightly different look you get in a format in which people aren't expecting it, as well of course as being able to shoot in 6K anamorphic on the Lumix GH5. In the anamorphic mode, the GH5 and the GH5S use the whole sensor area, which in the GH5 gives us a picture measuring 4,992 by 3,744 pixels. That's 18.7 million pixels. De-squeeze this 4:3 image out by 1.33 to 16:9 and we end up with a frame that measures 6,639 pixels wide and an image that's 24.86 million pixels. Delivering a film in this sort of resolution might be overkill for most projects, but when you downsample to 4K and Full HD, you get a really detailed looking picture. Probably of more practical use though is the ability this resolution gives you to crop and to pan and to zoom in post-production. When shooting with the Lumix GH5S, the GH1 and the Blackmagic cameras, we have the option to shoot in the regular 16:9 4K, but also 17:9 cinema 4K. The difference is that regular 16:9 shooting, which is what most cameras will allow, will give us a 2.36 to 1 letterbox once the footage is de-squeezed. If we shoot in the 17:9, we end up with a longer frame that's 2.5 to 1, and which might look slightly more anamorphic. The 17:9 mode also gives us a slightly wider capture area, which takes in more of the covering circle, so we get a wider view too. When shooting regular 16:9, we get a horizontal angle of view that matches what we'd expect from a 36mm lens on a full frame or 35mm sensor. But in 17:9 mode, that opens out a little to something more like a 32mm lens. Although clearly designed for movie makers, this lens presents some interesting options for stills photographers as well. And it will fit on any Micro Four Thirds body. I've been shooting with the Lumix G9 and putting the stills into Photoshop. You de-squeeze them, by altering the horizontal axis in the image size dialog to 133%. Just make sure you untick the constrain aspect ratio box too. This stretches our 5184 pixel horizontal out to 6895 pixels and makes a total pixel count of 26.7 million pixels. Though of course there's some interpolation going on there. So what should you expect from this lens? Well, I found it's nice and sharp, particularly with close subjects, and there's plenty of contrast too. More than enough resolution for 6K video, and actually even for high resolution mode pictures with Lumix cameras and high res shot pictures with Olympus cameras. As you'd expect, best apertures in the middle of the range, and there's plenty of flare as well. People expect flare from anamorphic lens, it's almost essential. And actually with this wider angular view, it can pick up those blue streaks with the slightest hint of a light aimed in its direction. There's not much vignetting to speak of, I'm afraid, so you'll have to add your own. And the very low levels of chromatic aberration mean we don't really have to be too careful about how we use this or what we keep in the corners of the frame. Even with the stretch, chromatic aberration doesn't really play much of a part. While it's bigger and heavier than the two previous lenses from Sirui, I found the 24 balances just as nicely as the 35 and the 50 on the camera. It still fits comfortably in the gimbal, and it still works in all the cages that I use the other two lenses in as well. Inevitably, some people will say that a 1.33 times squeeze doesn't make a proper anamorphic lens, but it's horses for courses, and this anamorphic factor is actually really useful for micro four thirds users. Of course, I would love a 2 times anamorphic that would stretch my 4:3 sensor out to that 2.66 to 1 cinemascope aspect ratio, but I suspect that's going to make a much bigger lens. And actually, do you know, I'm quite happy with this option right now.